space race is what has led to space militarization. The US military used its satellite communication systems to coordinate forces, to share intelligence, and to command and control across the theater of operations in the Middle East. Others were quick to learn a lesson from this and began accelerating their military space programs, which was until then limited to reconnaissance and surveillance. The most glaring example was China's demonstration of the Asat capabilities in 2007, or the capability to strike and destroy an adversary satellite in Earth's orbit. The US was the first country to establish a dedicated military branch for space operations called the US Space Force. Recently, that India came up with its own Defense Space Agency, which is a tri-service command. Hello everyone, I'm Radhika Daga and I'm here to start a discussion and debate on national security issues. The objective of these series is to kindle the confident and curious minds of today's India, or Bharat. The aim is to be able to spread awareness about these critical issues, because it is only awareness that can lead to a developed and mature nation, which is the dream of every Indian today. Today's topic of discussion will be space security. A record-breaking 8 million eyes were glued to their screens to witness the landing of Chandrayaan 3. If you're watching this video, I want you to retrospect that feeling of joy and success which you felt in that moment when you watched the landing of Chandrayaan 3. Sure enough, the Indian Space Research Organization achieved a historical feat by making its first ever soft landing on the south pole of the moon, which was also the first by any nation ever. But why was every Indian feeling so proud to be an Indian that day? Probably because we've all heard it somewhere at some point in our lives that whoever controls space is going to control the future, or that the next world war will be fought in space. Hence, to commemorate this collective feeling of achievement and excitement, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi commemorated this day as the National Space Day. So what comes after India has successfully landed on the moon? China, Russia, and the US have already made several landings on the moon. Other nations, including Japan, South Korea, and Israel, have made a few attempts too. Then why is our presence in the outer space so important anyway? To answer this question, let us understand what space means for a common man. Philosophically, all of us at some point have agreed and believed that the universe connects us all. But do we realize that today our worlds are literally created and connected beyond and outside our planet? Isn't it a eureka moment when you realize that not only government and space agencies, citizens too are equal stakeholders in this ever-growing and expanding space industry? All nations began their space programs for peaceful and humanitarian purposes. The reflection of signals from a satellite enabled what is called the satellite communication systems. All the broadcasting services are based on these satellite communication systems. The GPS navigation system has almost become the backbone of every industry today. Imagine all our shopping experiences would not have been possible if it wasn't for the global positioning system. Rural lives too have changed in significant ways through the surveillance and forecasting data received from remote sensing systems. Even critical sectors like banking, education, and healthcare are increasingly reliant on the space-based solutions. I read it somewhere that space has become the foundation of the modern society and is the key to its future prosperity. And I couldn't agree more. In the last 20 years itself, the number of satellites in Earth's orbit have increased from roughly 800 in 2003 to more than 11,000 in 2023. This is also because the access to space has become easier and cheaper than it was 60 decades ago. If you have heard, it was a few students from a Nigerian university who could design and build their own satellites, of course with the intervention of a few foreign space agencies. Similarly, space exploration missions are as important for the scientific community as they are to meet the future demands for resources by mankind. The deep space missions, including the missions to Moon and Mars, are aimed at identifying those resources which can be mined from space and used for different purposes on Earth. For example, the discovery of valuable and rare minerals like helium-3 on Moon's surface opened new doors for the future energy requirements. Hence, space exploration not only enhances our knowledge of the outer space, but it also presents new opportunities for the future. We can see how national aspirations are growing and are even being met in the space realm today. However, the resources both on ground and in space are bound to remain limited, which is why an intense competition is inevitable. This is what the experts today call the space race. And space race is what has led to space militarization, or rather the concept of space militarization. Let me explain. After having achieved its aspirations in space, it is a nation's duty to ensure its continuation and protection from any perceived threats, internal or external. At the beginning of the space age, the two spacefaring nations, the US and the USSR, used their satellites against each other for the purposes of spying, surveillance, or precise navigation. However, it was in 1991 that the US launched a full-fledged war based on its satellite communication systems. The US military used its satellite communication systems to coordinate forces, to share intelligence, and to command and control across the theater of operations in the Middle East. Others were quick to learn a lesson from this and began accelerating their military space programs, which was until then limited to reconnaissance and surveillance. The most glaring example was China's demonstration of the Asat capabilities in 2007, or the capability to strike and destroy an adversary's satellite in Earth's orbit. The entire world was left in a shock and the space with a huge amount of space debris. The US was the first country to establish a dedicated military branch for space operations called the US Space Force in 2019, and others soon followed the suit. It was recently that India came up with its own Defence Space Agency, which is a tri-service command. The scope of space applications in military operations has expanded into more diverse areas. For example, the United States operates the Space-Based Infrared System, the SBIRS, which includes a constellation of satellites which are equipped with infrared sensors to detect and track the launch of ballistic missiles worldwide. This data provides early warning and tracking of missile threats for the US and the Allied forces. Simultaneously, all modern-day weaponry and the weapon delivery platforms are equipped and are compatible with space-based applications like the precise guided munitions or the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Counter-space technologies like the ASAT capabilities have been tested by 4 countries today. India was the 4th country to test its ASAT missiles in the year 2019. Alternatively, an adversary satellite or its critical information infrastructure can be neutralized through means of jamming and spoofing of signals. In one of the most recent cases, it was an American aerospace agency which provided the Ukrainians with the most effective and vital tool to fight a war against the Russians. It was the SpaceX Aerospace Agency, which provided its Starlink satellite internet services to the Ukrainians. After the destruction of Ukraine's internet and communication infrastructure, the Ukrainians requested the American Aerospace Agency SpaceX to activate their Starlink satellite internet services in their country. Since then, Starlink has been used by Ukrainian civilians, government, and military for both their defensive and offensive operations against the Russian military posts. Despite developing these technological capabilities, no country has openly challenged or attacked an adversary's satellite systems. However, the projection of technological capabilities alone can ensure a country's national security interests in space. As the space program matures technologically, the focus must simultaneously shift to the collective and responsible utilization of space resources. India has stood as an example in both the cases. ISRO has collaborated with various foreign space agencies including NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency JAXA. Simultaneously, despite a robust space program, India has strongly emphasized on space as a common heritage of mankind, both in theory and practice. With an increase in satellite launches, the space debris and congestion is going to become a serious issue for nations going forward. The United States and India have signed a space situational awareness arrangement in an attempt to avoid collisions and keep the environment in space clean. India has recently, in June 2023, signed the US-led Artemis Accords, which is a non-binding multilateral arrangement between countries participating in NASA's Artemis or the lunar program to return humans to the moon. It attempts to rewrite the rules of engagement in outer space by drawing on the articles from the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which remains largely ineffective. The signatories under this evolving framework will establish certain space laws and will agree on certain principles related to technology transfer, data sharing, and other such areas. After the announcement of the Artemis Accords in 2020, China and Russia announced their joint venture for setting up an international lunar research station on the moon. Evidently, geopolitics is playing a big role in shaping the future utilization and security of space. The space economy is booming and is expected to reach from a current value of $440 million to $3 trillion in 2040. This provides for a big motivating factors for countries and private players to participate in the space industry. Owing to the above factors related to economy, military and geopolitics, countries are caught up in a space race to maximize their share of resources from space. However, many countries today are looking towards India as a space power and a leader who can ensure that the benefits and the access to the resources from space are realized by all. Let us rethink about the ways in which India can ensure space security and its benefits for all of humanity. If you have anything to add to this subject, please use the comment section. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more such engaging discussions on national security issues.